Stoke-on-Trent, August the 4th, 1960. Dear Mr. Simcock, I was very pleased to hear from you again, and that you are so successful with your works, and hope that it may continue in future. It is a pity I did not meet you earlier in life, when I could have changed my methods, but now I feel it is too late. I have possibly worked harder than you, but it all seems to be of no purpose. I keep doing a bit in my old tin pot way, but not much, as I become very tired, and it takes one all the time to keep on living at my age, going on for 79. I miss the wife above a bit, as she used to do all my fetching and carrying requirements. Now I cannot get myself. I have not even been to Hanley for nearly 2 years. It is now a long time since Mr. Bemrose called. I suppose he is too busy. I have a fairly frequent visitor in Mr. James Ogden of 3 Halls Road, Station Road, Malcop, who would be pleased to see you if you called. I have mentioned you to him. We worked together for about 20 years at Park House Colliery. I shall be very pleased to see you at any time. If I am not in, call at 309 on the back gate in the backs, a little below something 12. I don't know what that word is. I go there to see the telly in the evenings. I must close now with kind regards and best wishes for your further success in your work. Yours sincerely, C.W. Brown.
Right. This picture of Pensford village was taken from an upper window of Whitley House, looking across the village opposite the top of Pensford Hill, showing the Brindon Hills and Dundee Hill in centre distance, whilst the Mendip Hill range is shown on extreme left. The Bristol Aerodrome is out of the picture on the right between Pensford and Bristol. The road shown at the top of Pensford Hill is from Bristol to Chew Magna and beyond, whilst the Hill Road passes through Pensford to Wells. The keeping of goats is very much in evidence in the Somerset area. Several being shown on the left, tethered on rough land near the railway. Over the railway bridge shown is the road from the village to the colliery and Stanton Wick. There is a foot-road under the viaduct to Stanton Drew by the stream, and on the other side a foot-road to Publow by the pub, where an old-time pound building may be seen. The schools are directly in the centre on the main road opposite the village institute. Most of the older houses are built of what is geologically termed white lias stone, which has been quarried in the locality from old quarries, which may still be seen between Publow and Bristol. By the different colour of the viaduct stone used, it appears to have been imported from other areas. The coal measures are in this Pensford basin different from any other the author has experienced, and the fact of its being in contour so very much the same when laid down as diversified as the present surface. Another significant fact is that in the coal mining I have never witnessed the least sign of inflammable gas in the pits in the area, although the coal of one seam especially produces more gas per ton than any other I have known when produced at a gasworks retorts. But there was more than a little black dam gas. C.W. Brown, AMI, Min-E, April 1955. We'll just chat about it.
Not a big lot to take there.
Oh, it doesn't. Well, we can use the other side, John.
Only 2 track.
Yeah?
That's still only 2 tracks. Anyways, anything particularly you want to know before
oh yeah, what about that, you know what you were saying, Jack, about the perspective, you know, could you tell that tale?
Yeah. When I used to visit him, there was one thing that he was always harping on about, and that was he couldn't believe, I don't think he ever did believe, that I knew nothing about perspective, because it was a sort of, the reason we met was because we admired each other's work, you see. And I think one of the things that he admired about my work most was the perspective, because of the buildings, you know. And although he was sort of very self-centred and so on, a bit of a big head, a lot of a big head, in fact.
Was he?
In spite of that, he was very keen to learn. He wanted to learn more all the time, and he wanted you to criticise his work. Now, he used to insist that I must have worked it out, that I must know something about perspective. He said, because if you don't know anything about perspective, you wouldn't get it right, you say. He says, you can get and work it out. Well, I said, but Mr. Brown, it must come natural to me. I don't know anything about perspective. He says, well, he says, you can get and establish your eye level fast, can't you? I said, no, I don't do that, Mr. Brown. Well, no, I just could never drill it in him that I knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it was that I could never convince him that the perspective, the bad perspective, because I didn't used to say it was bad perspective to him, but the bad perspective in his work was one of the very qualities, one of its qualities. If he had attempted to improve it and get it right, as it were, it wouldn't have been any good. It wouldn't have been interesting.
No, no.
He thought he had got it right.
Yeah. Jack, have you any sort of insight into this business of him being an engineer who obviously could do correct diagrams, and this primitive painter who, with that gate there, the size of the railway bridge, have you any idea what was there any aspect of his character that showed it otherwise than these paintings?
No, I think he was a very, very complex person. These technical drawings that he did, I mean, obviously he must have known how to draw perspective, and he would work these things out mathematically. You see, if you look at some of his drawings, sketches for paintings, that he'll work the perspective out of the building very carefully. You'll see the lines there and the numbers and so on. And it looks all right when he in his mechanical diagrams, but when it gets into the painting, it isn't so much that it's out of perspective. If you take a particular part of the painting that is worked out carefully, that will be right. It will be in perspective. But another part of the painting, which is also in perspective, is not correct in relation to the other. You know.
Yeah.
So I can only conclude that it was that he did know about perspective. He was able to work it out technically, but he just didn't appreciate the fact that to achieve an aesthetic quality in a painting, it didn't have to be right.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It was sheer lack of taste.
Yeah.
That's what it amounted to. I think he got such deplorable taste as a painter. He was naive in that respect. From the artistic and aesthetic point of view. He really believed, and this is a fact, he really believed that that his pictures, that the way he painted the things, the way he drew them, he really believed that was how they were. Now, if you attempted to point out to him that people didn't look like that, or that the scale of such and such a thing was wrong, or that a sky wasn't like that blue, or that the grass wasn't as green as that, he would argue with you. It was. This is this. You know, people very often ask the question. Say, does Picasso see things like he paints?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, he doesn't. But Mr. Brown did.
Yes.
To all intent and purposes, he saw what he painted. He thought the things he depicted in his paintings, he thought they were true to life.
Yes.
This was his aim, but he very often had his doubts about it and would say, you know, I don't mind you criticising it. If you say out wrong, you can tell me. And I'd say, but Mr. Brown, don't you understand? If I start to criticise your work and say this is wrong and that's wrong and this is out of scale and so on, I'm criticising the very things that I admire. The things that are technically wrong or and aesthetically wrong are the things that I like. I don't want you to put them right.
Yeah. Did he understand it?
I don't think he ever did understand it, no.
So Jack, you couldn't give him any advice at all, really, could you, as a painter?
I didn't want to give him any advice. He wanted advice.
Well, Jack, before you start, I've got one question. I've got no idea of the picture of his wife at all. Could you tell me that little story that you said when you went to pick that flower painting?
Yes, well, we went along. I took the wife and, well, the only child we got then. Tony was a baby. It was about 1954, 55. Buying the painting. Well, it's not much of a story to that. It was just that we wanted some of his work. We had no idea how much he wanted for them, but he got the impression that we were interested to have something of his, you see. And at that time I couldn't really afford to give him anything, you know, not what I felt they were worth.
Yeah.
It was more of a present, really. I picked a flower painting, and my wife said, "Well, I don't like that one. I like the other one." And the missus, you know, his missus says, "Well, you know, put that in, give it, let her have that." You know. But she was. If you want to know about Mrs. Brown, what little I do know about her, she was a rather subdued person because he was definitely a Victorian husband. He kept her well in her place. He kept her, as he said in the letter, to do his fetching and carrying and so on. I don't really know how he thought of her in other ways, but he definitely would, I imagine, when all the family were together, treat her like the rest of the family and keep her in a place like he did the children.
Yeah.
But she was a very nice woman, very kind woman. She always wanted to nurse Tony, our baby,
yeah.
You know. And she was a very hospitable, fussy. And of course he would sit there bolt upright. He always sat, you know, in a hard, straight back chair. Would you like me to describe him?
Yeah.
As near as I can. He was a very big man, very tall, very straight. So much so that you got the impression that he was leaning backwards. He was so straight he was leaning back. So that you also got the impression that he tapered off. As he got higher, he got smaller, so that the top of his head seemed rather small compared with the rest of his body, seemed rather narrow at the top. when he was dressed up, he wore a dark suit, dark three-piece suit with a gold albert. He wore a flannel shirt, always a flannel shirt, striped flannel shirt with a very, very stiff white collar. I can't remember whether this collar was turned up at the corners or whether it was round at the corners, but it was noticeable. It looked unusual, it looked Victorian or Edwardian, and it gave him this very old-fashioned look. He looked out of place among other people at the Society of Statutory Artist meetings. My wife said she thinks he wore a dicky bow, but I don't think so. I just can't see him like that. But there was something. Yeah, I very often was attracted to his collar, to his neck.
His portraits show one of those up here and turned over.
Yeah, do they? Well, that was it then. But I think it made him. His collar was so stiff, so high, that he seemed to be unable to turn his head properly. And this was very unusual at that time. Nobody else was wearing these sort of stiff collars. He was he got a very fresh complexion, very clean. Looked as if his face had been scrubbed until it shone. White hair. He sometimes let it grow rather long, not long like mine. I don't mean on his shoulders, but sort of over his ears a bit, and a little bit rough. White moustache. He'd got a very, what is it? A concave goes in like that. Is it concave?
Concavely, yeah.
His face, the contour of his face seemed to be concave that way. Ending in a very long pointed chin. But I think the most noticeable thing about him was his eyes, which were very bright, very lively, very clear. I don't know what colour. I should think they were blue. My memory's not too good on things like that. But his eyes always sparkled. He looked as if like an old man with a child's eyes, or with a young man's eyes.
Yes, yeah.
His eyes sort of dodged about, and you could see that inside this old exterior was a youth.
Did he sit among all his paintings, Jack? Was it like Aladdin's cave? This is how
Did he set them up?
Did he sit among them? Was the walls covered in them?
Oh no, they were always stacked against the wall, face to the wall, stacks of them. He kept them mostly in the front room, parcelled up in the drawers, wrapped in brown paper. I never went upstairs until after he died, but I believe he always said, as we were talking, he always said that there are thousands up there, a room full, I gathered. I always got the impression that the room was full.
Yeah.
And when I saw it, after he died, it was.
Did he give you any impression of having failed his life, Jack? His diary is one of failure. Now, does he say this? Did he give you this impression when he talked to you?
He regarded himself, he was very, very proud of his success in mining engineering. He seemed to be more proud of his technical drawings, his drawings for that mining.
The Art and Science of Mining
book. I don't know what it was. Magazine of some sort. Yeah, that's it. He did black and white illustrations and so forth for that, and he took more pride in showing these off than he did his paintings, because I wasn't the slightest bit interested in his mining drawings. But he was very, very proud of this. But the paintings, I don't think he was very sure about at all. proud, I don't even know whether he was proud of them. I think it was just something that he did, that he had to do. He must have spent a tremendous lot of time, hours and hours and hours. He must have sat there poring over these paintings, because there's such a terrific lot of detail in them. I think his disappointment was felt more and more in the last 10 years, because he enjoyed exhibiting with the Staffordshire artists. No doubt about this. I think he was satisfied with this. I don't think his ambition was to do any more than that. But after his wife died, he said he was not going to paint anymore. I'm not quite sure. I don't think, in fact, he did paint anymore. But he stopped exhibiting with the Staffordshire artists, and I think it was at this time that he started feeling that he got nowhere. Nothing was happening. Nothing was moving. The only thing in his mind at that time was that he was leaving all his work to the Stoke-on-Trent Corporation. This seemed to be his ambition almost now.
Jack, I've got this theory, take it as you like, that when his wife died, for the first time, he was very fed up for a long time. Then for the first time, he seemed to lose ambition in the Staffordshire artists, and he painted in oils on plywood and hardboard. And I firmly believe that it was in the last couple of years with these oil paintings that he sort of reached the heights of genius. This one is done in an oil painting, and they were all nostalgic, Bob. Jack.
Yes.
They were all nostalgic.
Now, I can tell you something about that. When I used to visit him after his wife died, and I saw just how lonely he was feeling, I could see that he was giving up, and I felt instinctively that something had got to be done, otherwise he would soon be following her. And one of the first things I did was to suggest that I took some of his work down to London to show to Herbert Reed, because Herbert Reed is, well, if there is an authority on primitive painters, it's Herbert Reed. And I wanted him to see them. It wasn't because I particularly thought that, he may be a great discovery, but I thought it was worth taking a chance. And I remember going one day and sorting through parcels of paintings out of the drawers in the front room there, and I sorted about a dozen or so, maybe a couple of dozen, paintings on paper, watercolours, about 1 foot by 9 inches, that size. And I took these down to London, and that's in the letter, you see, where he got impatient, because in fact Herbert Reed was away, he was abroad, there was some delay, and Mr. Brown got impatient and wanted them back. As he said, he felt that if they hadn't decided that they were worth anything by now, then they never would.
Yeah.
He wanted them back. What else did you want to know about that?
Well, you said you could throw some light on this oil painting business.
Sorry,
it's nostalgia.
Yes. He got these paintings back. This didn't seem to have done the trick. So I started trying to encourage him to paint again. He said he didn't want to paint in the old way. He'd done his whack. He'd painted all he wanted to paint. He was tired, you see. He said if he started again, he wanted to do something new. So I said, right, well, I'll tell you what to do. We'll get some hardboard, size it, I'll get some oil paint, I'll get you a knife, and have a go at some oil painting. I don't mean enamels, you know, hard gloss and stuff, which he had used in the past on hardboard panels, I think. I meant oil paint, and with a knife, which he'd never used before. I thought this would give him a sort of new incentive to try and master the knife, you see. I believe he did, well, I did get him these things, in fact, but I don't think he ever used them. Each week when I went, I used to visit him once a week. I was teaching in the potteries at that time, and during my dinner hour I used to go along and call on him. I used to eat my sandwiches on the way there, on the way back, and used to go and have a chat with him. I used to go the front way, and he always used to be quite a while coming to the front door and bolting the front door, and he was always absolutely delighted to see me. You know, I could hardly get away. You're not going already, are you? Oh, I'm afraid I've got to be back, Mr. Brown, for 2 o'clock, you know, afternoon school sort of thing. Oh, he says, you don't seem to have been here 5 minutes. And we used to talk about his paintings, and he would, you know, like all old men, he was a terrible, terrible bore. He used to reap up stories of the past, and he would go from one incident to another. All incidents would be unrelated to each other. They would be unrelated to what we began to talk about in the first place. And you know, the typical old man. And I used to try and keep getting back to this, the theme of getting on with something, occupying himself. But no, he would sit there reaping up the past and saying how he missed his wife, and now he couldn't bring himself to do any more. He was tired, and he hadn't been so well, and nobody cared anyway. He said, well, better mention no names, but
Bemrose.
Yeah, all right, you're okay. He used to say, Mr. Bemrose, Anna been again. I said he'd come and say me, but he done it. I think it was to do. He wanted him to come mainly to do with this, you know, leaving the pictures to the corporation. But I think it would have, quite apart from that, it would have given him a terrific kick that the curator of the City Art Gallery, you know, was paying him a visit. This would have been, he'd have lived on this for months afterwards, you know, just one visit. But Mr. Bemrose never came. You say about oil paintings, I don't know that he did do any real oil paintings, you know, paintings in artist's oil paint. He had painted, as I say, in enamels on board before, quite early on.
Had he?
Because, in fact, I think one of the very first paintings that the City Art Gallery ever bought, that was in the permanent collection, when first I saw his work, before I knew him, that was between 1951 and 53, I met him in 1953, they got one of his paintings then in enamel oil paint on board, and he did paint in that medium from time to time.
Well, you should.
Yes, positive. But I don't think he liked it. I think he felt it was too laborious and a bit sort of sticky, and I don't think he liked the idea of having to he felt that he'd got to paint a bit and then leave it to dry before he painted any more. He was frightened of one colour running into another and all this kind of thing, you know, which he could do this. He could paint in watercolours and not be afraid of this. But obviously with enamels, I mean, they would run into each other. But he never got around to, I don't think he ever got around to painting in oils with a knife.
Well, Jack, I'll just check up. Hang on a minute. I'll just check up my caravan, because I may have that part of his diary.
I persuaded him one day to let me fetch him over to Simcock for the day. And of course he dressed him up to the knocker with his stick, you know, and his hair nicely parted. And he came over here for the day and sat about, and we chatted, and he liked to be with the children, you know, and with the family. But there's just one thing I remember particularly, and my wife always laughs about this. When he came in to the kitchen, and the children came in, he put his hand in his pocket and he says, "Here, I brought this for the children." And it was a packet of toffee sausages. Not a toffee apple, toffee sausages. And he'd obviously been and bought this, you know, before I'd collected him that morning. It's almost, you know, the pink toffee sausages are kind of unreal like his paintings. No, and a bit childish in a way. When I used to visit him from during the dinner hour, when I was at teaching at Basford, when he'd been ill, I used to go over in the dinner hour, and I started going the back way, and I used to look through the window, and he'd got his bed downstairs in the kitchen opposite the window, and sometimes I'd see him lying on his bed and he would be asleep, and I would go back, you know, and not disturb him. Other times, if I saw he was awake, I'd sort of tap on the window and go in. But he was he didn't like this idea of having his bed downstairs, and he didn't like being ill, but he was very, very clean, very particular. You know, before he actually took to his bed, I sometimes used to go and find him in the middle of cleaning up. He'd got the chairs on the table, all the rugs out, the carpets out, and there were there was the wet quarry floor. He'd been scrubbing or mopping the floor. This was after his wife died, you know. He still kept the house clean, tidy, and did. I mean, his daughter did a lot for him, but you know, he used to keep himself busy and do quite a lot in the house for himself. He was a very arrogant, very proud and very arrogant. There is another little story. He used to say, he once said, I think, I can't remember the exact detail of it. I think he'd been to visit somebody on Biddulph Moor, and he was walking down from Biddulph Moor, and he met a man coming towards him, a workmate, a man that he'd worked with in the pit for many years. But at this time, Mr. Brown was some kind of official, you see, and this man was still a collier. And when they met, the man said, "How do, Bill?" And Mr. Brown stopped him and he said, "Bill?" He said, "It's Mr. Brown to you." And he said to me, he said, "Calling me Bill, and I'm his superior." I first met him in 1953. I joined the Staffordshire Artists in 1951, and I'd seen his work consistently in the exhibitions for 3 years. I'd wanted to meet him. I'd never met a primitive painter before. He was the only primitive painter I knew. I admired his work anyway. I knew that he was an old man. I knew that he'd some connections with Biddulphmore, and my folk come from Biddulphmore. So I thought we'd have something in common. I wanted to meet him. And on this occasion, 1953, it was the opening of an exhibition in Hanley Art Gallery of the Society of Staffordshire Artists. And I asked somebody if they would point out Mr. Brown to me, which they did. I went over to him, and when we met, he told me that he had been wanting to meet me ever since he saw me work in the Staffordshire Artists exhibition 3 years ago. And it was a kind of mutual thing, you know, and we made friends immediately. And I think I was probably the youngest member of the Society of Staffordshire Artists then, and he was almost certainly the eldest. I was on the selection committee, and I forget what year, but for quite a few years, and they used to bring the work in front of us, and the moment Mr. Brown's work came on, you know, we'd all sort of get up out of our chairs and go and gather round and look at these paintings, and and there's a smasher. And of course, I mean, it wasn't a matter of voting. There was no point in voting. I mean, they were all in, and whatever he sent, they were in. I don't think he knew what a primitive was, what a primitive painter was. I used to point out under pressure certain technical errors, sort of thing, in his painting, but he was never convinced. He used to think they were right. You could never convince him that a thing was out of proportion. You didn't want to really, but he sort of pressed you to criticise, and when you did, he just didn't see it at all.
Yeah.
He didn't know that things didn't look like that. As I say, he strove to make things look like they really were, and in a lot of cases, in most cases, he thought he had achieved this.
Yes.
From what one of the paintings, he's done a portrait of himself in the bottom right-hand corner. It's a superficial likeness. It's out of proportion. A small body and a big head.